are here for Marx Dialectical Studies interviews with Dr. Fineschi, member of the International Symposium on Marxian Theory. He has published some books on Marx, and he is the editor with Professor Riccardo Bellofiori of the recently published book Rereading Marx. We will talk about two recent releases in the second section of Marx-Engels Gesamtausgabe. What are the most interesting novelties about the process of the circulation of capital coming out by the publication of this manuscript in the second section of Marx-Engels Gesamtausgabe?
So, thanks for this interview. The Marx-Engels Gesamtausgabe represents a very big novelty in the research on Marx and Engels, and in particular the second section is relevant for the Capital, because in this section all the manuscripts from Marx and Engels are published, and also the published editions of Book 1, 2, 3. The most important novelty is that our traditional idea of a second book of Capital is not consistent, in the sense that even if it was well known that Engels' edition was an arrangement from several manuscripts from Marx, we finally have the occasion, thanks to the Mega, to read these manuscripts and to compare these ones with Engels' edition. And the results of this comparison are, to a certain extent, shocking. So I said shocking, so in a provocative way, because the most important point is that a finished second book of Capital does not exist, and this needs to be stressed. On the other side, this does not imply that we don't have at all a second book of Capital. We have to distinguish what Marx manuscripts are and what Engels' edition is.
In what sense Marx-Engels Gesamtausgabe can open new fields of research on Marx's second book of Capital?
According to the Mega, for the second book of Capital, we don't have one volume, but we have 5 volumes. This is the most relevant novelty, because the traditional Engels edition of Book 2 is published again in as volume 13 and appeared in 2008, but this is just one of 5, because we have three further volumes for all the 8 manuscripts and some drafts from Marx, and another volume for Engels' redactional manuscript of Book 2.
What is the relationship between the manuscripts of Marx and the editorial work of Engels?
This is a very controversial point on which many scholars focus, because some think that if we consider Engels' editorial work as a rearrangement of Marx materials, this would imply a sort of conflict between the two. So it was argued also in the past that Engels would be the betrayal of Marx and the creator of Marxism. So I would stress that this is not the point. So these positions can be discussed, of course, but this is not the principal point of the Mega edition. What the Mega edition shows to us is First, that Marx manuscripts for Book 2 and also those for Book 3, but so, were not completed, were not finished. So these materials could not be published as they were. And so this is why not just Engels, but whoever tried to publish these materials as a finished book needed necessarily to finish these books. So we can argue if Engels' edition of these materials is more or less correct, but it's a matter of fact that the publication of a finished book is Engels' work.
What was the state of these manuscripts? Do you think that Engels' edition was misleading for scholars?
So we have to distinguish 2 points. The first is the general idea of the division of the book into 3 parts. So this idea is very clear in the first manuscript of 1865 and is the same idea that we found in the last version of 1881. So the general partition of the content is always the same. We have several differences instead in the organization of the materials. As for the first section, we have several versions, and so Marx's ideas on these were more clear than, for instance, for the second section or for the third. In these 2 last sections, we don't have, for instance, many titles of the parts, many internal divisions of the sections. So we can see that Marx worked on Book 2 more or less in 3 different phases. So we have the first manuscript written, as I said, as part of the manuscript 1863-65. Then a second phase after the publication of the first German edition of Book 1, and in particular between 1867 and 1870, more or less, and then a final phase starting with 1876 until 1881. So if we set apart the first manuscript, which was not used at all by Engels, we have more or less that Engels used all the other ones. The materials for the first section were more worked out, while for the second we have substantially 2 manuscripts and then 2 other manuscripts for the third section. So in the light of these materials, Engels' edition to a certain extent modified the Marx materials, but this was necessary to a certain extent because these materials were not finished, were not written in the same period. So some materials were more elaborated, some less, and some materials were more elaborated for one section but less elaborated for another section. And so the problems that Engels had to deal with were relevant. In particular, Engels' interventions regard, for instance, the position of parts of the text. These positions, in some cases, were changed, or also the division of the text, or for instance, Engels transformed some footnotes into the main text. Or for instance, Engels himself wrote passages to connect different Marx passages. Engels created titles, Engels created paragraphs, Engels so proofed calculations, this kind of stuff. And so, all in all, he changed at least something in every page of Marx manuscripts.
And so we have in front of us a new second book of Capital.
Yeah, for sure. We have the traditional second book of Capital and also Marx's original manuscripts, which were not finished by Marx. And so we have actually Marx's several attempts to write this book.
Why Marx didn't finish the second book of Capital?
So this is a controversial question, so we can try to answer by taking into account that Marx was on one side very busy, because after the publication of the first German edition of Book 1, he published the second German edition, a French edition, and he himself revised the translation, so it was a lot of work. But he was also busy with the International Workers' Association. But on the other side, we have to consider other theoretical points. In particular, the development of capitalism in that years. And Marx started studying many different subjects, not only political economy, but also mathematics, agronomy, so many different things, because he felt like he needed to study further, to have more materials, more empirical materials, to finish his second book and also the third book of Capital. And we can also consider the familiar side, because so as you know, he had many problems with his family as for health. So his wife died, another daughter died, so also this side did not help his work.
We would like to thank Dr. Fineschi for joining Marx Dialectical Studies.
So you're welcome. Thanks to Marx Dialectical Studies.